2018 is shaping up to be one of the 3 or 4 hottest years ever recorded. That's contributing to the worst wildfire season in California's history. And climate scientists say we could start seeing more and stronger hurricanes as a result. A new piece in Salon says it all. The headline reads, "On climate change, it's time to start panicking." I spoke with the writer of that piece yesterday, Matthew Rosa. So Matthew, your recent column on climate change, it's time to start panicking. We've been hearing that or some version of that for years, if not decades. Why now? Why is now the moment where you've decided it's time to start panicking?
Well, it's not the moment when I've decided to start panicking. It's the moment when President Donald Trump has pulled America out of the Paris Climate Accord. We are seeing major wildfires in California. We're seeing other examples of erratic weather activity, all of which indicate that climate change, man-made climate change, is not only real, but is having an actual toll on the planet. And I spoke to some of the top minds in climate science, all of whom agree that it's a catastrophe, and all of whom agree that political steps need to be taken to avert it.
So that begs the question, is it too late? Have we passed a point of no return when it comes to climate change?
If you're talking about avoiding any permanent effects on the planet, then yes, we have passed the point of no return. If, on the other hand, you're talking about avoiding the literal extinction of our species, no, we have not passed the point of no return. But I wrote a different article that compared the 2016 election, where the two candidates had starkly different views on climate change, to the 1920 presidential election, where the two candidates had starkly different views on entering the League of Nations. And on both of those occasions, America voted for the Republican who was opposed to what needed to be done, even though the Democrats supported it. And as a result, subsequent calamities, in the case of the former World War II, and in the case of the latter, the ecological disasters that we're seeing, wound up ensuing. So to answer your question, no, it's not too late from an existential standpoint, but we only get so many second chances.
So one of the interesting takes that you had in that column is that when it comes to how we remedy climate change, the policies that we could implement, you seem to be somewhat agnostic. You cared less about what we do or how we do it as long as we do something. Is that a fair take?
I'd say that's a reasonable take. Obviously, I think something like a carbon tax would be more effective, but I think the bigger issue is us having the political will to get things done, to actually move forward. And what makes America, unfortunately, an outlier is that our government is unwilling to even acknowledge that the problem exists. And you have a certain strain of right-wing conspiracy theorists who is anti-intellectual, who doesn't trust scientists, who doesn't trust academia, and who as a result is not inclined to believe that this is actually happening. And then you have the people who are in the pockets of energy companies or other organizations that are worried their profit margin might decline if global warming is effectively addressed. And those groups together have enough sway over the political party in charge of this country that they've been able to make it so that we're not even able to take one step forward. So once everyone agrees that the house is burning down, then we should start talking about how to put out the fire. But right now, there are people who, for a variety of ideological or financial reasons, don't even want to acknowledge that the problem exists, that the house is, in fact, on fire.
And you went through the anti-climate change coalition, as it were, a group that's seemingly completely in support of President Trump. And then you look through President Trump's agenda when it comes to the environment so far, pulling us out of the Paris Accord, or you see Scott Pruitt and now a successor, turning the EPA from an entity that protects the environment to one that protects businesses. My question is, what gets through to voters then? Are you sensing that voters are unhappy with the direction that this administration has taken environmental policy, or is there still a disconnect between the concerns about the environment and how voters respond?
Unfortunately, there is a much higher percentage of the American people who question whether climate change is man-made and whether it's catastrophic because of the aforementioned coalition. We live in a hyper-partisan society, and so people who, for whatever reason, have aligned themselves with the Republican Party are going to be suckered in by the arguments of the energy lobbyists and the anti-government dogmatists and the right-wing conspiracy theorists, whether because they actively share those thought patterns or simply by default. And to answer your question, this is a political issue where there should be unity and there isn't. So I don't have an immediate answer other than the fact that the house is on fire and we still need to draw attention to it. Because that's the thing about political exigencies. You can ignore them as much as you want, but they're not going to go away. The house is burning down. And if we're the country that is responsible for it burning down because we pull out of a common sense agreement like the Paris Climate Accord, that will be such a shameful legacy for America.
Finally, Matthew, you've mentioned that you don't think we passed a point of no return, at least when it comes to the existential threat of protecting and sustaining life, human life on Earth. From the climate experts you spoke with, do we know how far away that point of no return might be, or how much longer we can dither before we either have to act or acting won't matter?
There seems to be, it's hard to say any of these things with precision because the climate is an incredibly complex, I don't want to say organism because it's not a living creature, but I think metaphorically that works. It's very complex. There are a lot of systems at play. So it's very unlikely that we're going to see a situation like the movie where one day it's hunky-dory and the next day there are glaciers conquering Manhattan or whatever nonsense Roland Emmerich came up with. That's not what it's going to be. It's more like the famous story of how you put a frog in a pot of water and you turn the heat up immediately to boiling, it'll hop out. But if you turn the heat up very gradually, it will allow itself to slowly die. And that is more of what we're dealing with here. And I'd say that might ultimately be the Achilles heel of democracy, at least when it comes to this issue, because you need the public to react to crises. But how do you handle a situation in which a crisis is clearly looming, but a variety of corrupt forces are able to confuse the public, and the crisis is not of such a drastic nature that you can see it right away?
Well, nobody can say we weren't warned. Matthew Rosa is a political blogger and a reporter with Salon magazine. Matthew, thanks for a few minutes. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Up next, it's primary day in Vermont. Several Democrats are on the ballot, including a 14-year-old middle school student and a candidate who could become the first transgender governor in American history. You'll meet both right after the break.